Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 5 and the final part of Little Blue Book number 1069, titled The Conquest of Fear, written by Leo Markun. Copyright 1920s somewhere. And this will be the final chapter. And without further ado, let's get started. The final chapter is titled The Fear of Death. Oops. Here we go. Let's get everything situated. The fear of death. In a way, as G. Stanley Hall shows in the brilliant last chapter of Seance, every fear is a fear of death. Fear has always to do with obstacles that stand in the way of those impulses which tend to preserve individual life and to perpetuate the race. Thus, when a woman stands before her mirror examining her first gray hairs and tracing her wrinkles, she is afraid that old age is coming, the natural prelude to death. Also, she dreads the decline of her ability to attract the male. When a man worries that he may lose his position, he is really concerned with the possibility of starving to death. Human vanity has reinforced the fear of death, of course. A man may commit suicide because he has lost several hundreds of thousands of dollars in speculation and has left an income of but $10,000 a year. Obviously, then, we are not justified in saying that all human fears are purely life preservative, nor is this what Hall argues. Rather, he shows how the impulse to accumulate wealth has grown out of the fear of death. We can see the instinct at work in the case of animals which store away food. As men first moved north and south from the tropical regions, assuming that the human race arose under the equator, they found it necessary, if they and their children were to survive, to build rude dwellings and to gather food which they might eat during the winter or when game and fish were difficult to get. Among some rude races, it is customary to eat ravenously of a deer or other large animal which has just been killed, after which there may be several weeks when very little food is obtainable. The art of drying meat in the sun is known to some peoples of rather low civilization. However, in order to make life more certain, fire was tamed by men. The dog and the horse and the cattle were domesticated. The working of metals was begun. Agricultural implements were employed. Roads were built. Houses were improved. Apparently, then, most of our civilization has risen in reaction to the emotion of fear. If, however, we mean by fear anything more than the consciousness of danger, we cannot argue from this fact that we must still depend upon it. Trembling and ignorant dread do not build cities and railroads. Civilization means, in the very widest sense, insurance. If the crops have failed in a certain district, the people who live in it, provided that they have money or credit enough and ample means of transportation, can bring food in from elsewhere. Even if they are without the ability to pay, their plight may arouse the sympathy of people who are willing to give up some of their own food, or more frequently, of the surplus existing after the feeding of most of their numbers has been arranged for, in order to help the less fortunate. Our laws are particularly directed against the slayer and the larcener. The murderer kills, but I can't turn a page. The murderer kills. That's not right there. No, it's not the right page. There we go. The murderer kills. The thief is half a murderer, for he takes away that which has been gathered together in order to prevent the owner from starving or freezing to death. Since the state guards its members against willful slayers, any attack upon it is supposed to be an indirect attack upon the individuals in it. Hence the laws against treason and lèse majesté, the laws against blasphemy, with which we may group the prohibitions of incest and various sexual perversions, along with dietary and sumptuary legislation of a religious character, are meant to keep the gods from destroying the community or the nation of which the irreligious person is a member. According to Schopenhauer, all systems of philosophy are essentially comforts for death, or antidotes to it. The same thing is true of most religions. Either they teach that death does not exist, or they attempt to convince us that death is a good thing. The Buddhists teach that nirvana, the final freeing of the soul from transmigration by means of its annihilation or its absorption into the divinity, is the great blessing to which a human being may look forward. Schopenhauer, who adopted the Buddhistic teachings to the mental attitude of Western Europe, said that death is the opportunity to no longer I. It is the only opportunity to lose one's individuality. We all have imperfections, and to at least a limited extent, we are conscious of them. Yet we value our own individuality. The great scientist Huxley once said that he would prefer hell, if the conditions were not too rigorous, to annihilation. People who believe that they will go to heaven after they die picture themselves in the future world very much as they are in this one. If they have deformities, they will be removed. Spotless white garments will be worn, perhaps in place of greasy overalls or spotted kitchen aprons. Wings may grow on the good people's shoulders, and the ability to join the heavenly harmony with harps and voice may suddenly be developed. Ordinarily, however, it is supposed that the earthly appetites will continue. Muhammad carefully explained that his faithful followers will be well supplied in paradise with food, drink, and whores, whom to mate. The theologians and philosophers who believe that life after death is merely the continued existence of the spirit, which bears no resemblance to the living man, and which does not think as he has thought, but which becomes part of the divine, have small influence over the great mass of the Christians in Europe and America. As well might they preach the metaphysics of men into swine and other animals. Very few of us can be comforted by Jean Genet's observations that beautiful bright-colored flies and other insects feed upon our corpses. Genet says the cremation is a crime against natural beauty and harmony. It is absolutely necessary that our bodies should decay, in order that loveliness may continue. If a man really fears death, the idea that roses and lilies will be nourished by his rotting flesh offers small consolation. Only the human being is afraid of death, which must inevitably overtake him. Other animals instinctively shrink from that which might bring about their dissolution, but they are not capable of knowing that death is the fate of all life. Certainly they have no power to ponder and wonder over the matter. Why should men and women be afraid of death? This question is not precisely the same as why do men and women desire to continue to live? To the human imagination, death is something more than a mere discontinuance of the life processes in an individual. When we feel a corpse, cold and clammy, we unconsciously assume that the dead person suffers from stiffness and frigidity, as a living man might suffer from a disease which caused such a condition. We all know that death and unconsciousness do not exist together, that the corpse experiences no discomfort because of its paleness and of the stiffness of its muscles. The imagination, however, has a logic of its own. Therefore, the man who is afraid to die may lie awake nights worrying about the loneliness which would come upon him when he is enclosed within a box which is laid underground, never again to embrace his wife and children. His loneliness after death, he imagines, will be like the feeling he has had when spending Christmas in an empty hotel in a strange city. No, it will be worse, for he will not be able to move, not able to even read a Bible provided by a thoughtful society of pious men. While he lies helpless in his grave, the worms will swarm over him, and he will feel as though he were tied hand and foot within a loathsome dungeon. Many persons indeed are fearful that they may be buried alive, on account of the physician's mistake. One wealthy man who died not very long ago left orders that a telephone communicating with the outside world should be left in his grave. If he woke to find himself alive but buried, he would have the opportunity to be dug out. It is true that the physicians have long been seeking for positive indications of death without ever having attained any single test which may be considered absolutely reliable. However, the combination of tests usually employed leaves little room for mistakes. In any case, the person whose corpse is burnt or embalmed will never again be a living individual. The ancient Hebrews who buried bodies on the day of death used to visit the tomb for several days to see that there had been no mistake. According to modern rabbinical laws, corpses need not be buried until 3 days after death, if the civil authorities forbid immediate burial. Most rabbis hold that cremation is illegal, however. The ancient Egyptians, in order that their physical bodies might live on after death, devoted great attention and energy to the art of embalming. According to the Mosaic teaching, the soul is connected or identified with the lifeblood. The old Hebrews believed that the decay of the body was necessary to atone for the original sin of man. The belief in the immortality of the soul seems to have come to the Jews from Plato and other Greek thinkers. Under their influence, Maimonides declared that the world to come is entirely spiritual and that bodily enjoyments can have no place in it. Both Jewish and Christian theologians of the present time are inclined to believe in resurrection. This is not true of all the modernist and progressive clergymen. According to Leibniz, morality and justice would be impossible in this world if men did not fear retribution in the next. Spinoza thought otherwise. Virtue is eternal bliss, even if we should not be aware of the soul's immortality. We must love virtue above everything. But some American courts agreed with Leibowitz, for they exclude or take, and the words are all, the print is almost all wore off. Something, the testimony of persons who are bold enough to say that they do not believe in personal immortality. Luther, who at one time was inclined to reject the dogma of life beyond life, later decided that it is necessary as a basis for morality. G. Stanley Hall's opinion, written in his old age, is interesting. My own partial studies incline me to believe that this conviction of personal persistence beyond the grave in general loses its force in seance, as indeed it becomes vital only at adolescence. In youth, he tells us, the fear of death is stronger than in the later years. Dr. Carrington, in Death and Its Problems, Little Blue Book number 524, I have to look for that one, says that young people rarely think of death. I am inclined rather to favor Hall's view. Sweet melancholy is associated with the first powerful consciousness of love. The healthy adult, if he is well adjusted to his environment, has neither time nor inclination to worry about death. As he passes the prime of life and begins to feel the decline of his faculties, his zest for life wanes. The adolescent, however, becomes frightened as he sees strange desires and powerful new appetites rising up within him. For some years, he is, to a certain extent, out of tune with his surroundings. More than at any other time, his emotions are confused and intermixed. At this period, obsessions and complexes may easily arise, and among them, those based upon fear, especially the fear of death, are very important. There are thanophobes who avoid the undertaker's show window, who refuse to walk near a cemetery, who hasten to change the conversation when a death is mentioned. The fear of death is at times capable of driving a person insane or of causing death. The absence of worry is the first thing that people desiring long life should strive for. This fact is so generally accepted and stressed that it appears platitudinous, yet no discussion of mental hygiene is complete without it. Why should any man or woman fear death? There is no good reason to believe that the worst sinner will in any manner suffer after his body has begun to decompose. As we have seen, the rotting of the corpse does not hurt. Confinement in a coffin is no punishment. Absence from friends is not painful to the dead man. It is a pitiful misunderstanding which causes people to insist upon being buried near the bodies of those whom they have loved while alive. If this is reasonable, then it is proper also to burn the widows with the dead husband, as the custom has been in India and elsewhere. The dead need no pennies and no food for their journey. They require no attendants and no wives after the clods are heaped upon them. Primitive peoples are inclined to think that the souls of the dead linger near the body. Sometimes they practice rites and say prayers which they intend to drive off the demons which come at the time of death or burial to injure the souls of the recently deceased. We civilized men, says G. Stanley Hall, go to a funeral to be sure that the body and the soul of the dead have been properly laid away, and haps require no such assurance. But the unconscious, out of which strange images come, must be satisfied. Stekel sees the fear of death in many dreams, which other psychologists interpret sexually. A bed, a churchyard, a dormitory, catacombs, the crossing of a dark river, a chest or trunk, are some of the death symbols frequently occurring in dreams. Men and women who wish in some way to live on after their bodies rot need not necessarily believe in the transmigrations of souls or in the resurrection of the body. They may feel that they continue to live in their children. Perhaps they can write books or paint landscapes or build houses which will be studied and admired centuries after their corpses have decomposed. Rich men cause universities and hospitals to be named after them, thus hoping that they will not altogether die when their hearts stop beating and their limbs turn cold. That's the end of that chapter. Now we have the final chapter, which is the Conquest of Fear. And it's just 2 pages. Clergymen sometimes tell us that there is no way to avoid fear except by trusting in the goodness of God. Most of them are willing that we should call in physicians and lawyers and plumbers to avert such dangers as can be foreseen. However, Basil King has written a book called The Conquest of Fear, in which he tells us how he used as a child to be afraid of a certain dog, and how other fears and worries troubled him later, until he understood divine goodness and shed all his fears. Are believers in God really less fearful than atheists and skeptics? Is it helpful to man to think that the divinity is fighting on his side? My own answer to both these questions would be in the negative, if it were necessary to reply to them here. Let us see what can be done to eliminate timidity and worry. The importance of physical health in this connection may profitably be stressed. The healthy individual, to be sure, really has less than the ailing one to be afraid of. However, a man suffering from a slight attack of indigestion is not on the account in immediate danger of death, but he is in a state to be susceptible to nervous anxiety, an ailment potentially at least as harmful as the indigestion which causes it. It may easily come about, then, that a man becomes more courageous because of a change in diet. One who has been eating too much meat and potatoes may find valor in green salads and fresh fruits. The timid and worrisome individual frequently finds it helpful to ingest himself in golf or some other sport. A good many persons who consider themselves chronic invalids need only take proper exercise in order to find themselves perfectly normal and healthy. Even going to the baseball park to watch others play may work a cure. Any concentrated avocational interest tends to prevent morbid introspection. The anxious neurotic is usually one who has too much leisure on his hands. The poor working man has more to worry about than the idle wife of a rich man, but he has less time to indulge himself in such a luxury. Some people apparently become nervous because of overwork. The Freudians say that hard work would not hurt them if their sexual relationships had been properly arranged. As I believe, we should speak of repressed will rather than of repressed libido. The problem is that of adjusting oneself to a complex civilization. It especially concerns the introvert, the individual who reacts to stimuli by thinking instead of by acting. The emotional introvert develops fear out of all sorts of strong feelings. Affected by the inferiority complex, he sometimes fears things which are in no manner dangerous to him except because of his emotional response to them. Nothing is more important than understanding one's environment. This sort of knowledge is not altogether to be gained through taking thought. However, there is no substitute for personal experience. Reflection has its proper place, no doubt, but it cannot serve instead of deeds. It is necessary to act even at times when the possibility of acting wrongly is great. Furthermore, no living man can insure himself absolutely against peril. The willing participant in the dangers of life can only die once. He who stands trembling in the background dies 1,000 deaths. No man need be ashamed of his fears. It is natural to be afraid. The brave man trembles at times. Also, he avoids unnecessary danger. But when he sets his will upon a certain objective, he forgets his fear and devotes himself to action. I cannot honestly recommend any hocus pocus or prayer formula to aid in the conquest of fear. I can only point out the intelligent path of courage. The virtue of a slave is to be ruled by fears. The virtue of a free man is to go where his will leads him, even in the face of death. And there you go. That is the end of Little Blue Book number 1069, called The Conquest of Fear, written by Mr. Leo Markun, sometime in the 1920s. There you go. Alrighty. Thanks for listening and join me in the next Little Blue Book.